Have you ever walked past a dumpster and been like, yo, I wonder what's in that dumpster?
I can put on these glasses. Let's start eating that trash.
Yeah, there's a baby in our garbage can.
You're listening to the True Crime Dumpster podcast with hosts Amy
and I'm Kevin.
And we're coming back at you this week with episode 72, which is our second part of Kip Kinkel. We do recommend that if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, to go back to episode 71 and listen to that one first, because this kind of covers the second half of his crimes and the aftermath. Whereas the first episode kind of covers his childhood and the start of his rampage, if you will.
You don't start a story from the middle, basically, is what she's saying.
Well, actually, a lot of writers do. It's called in medias res.
Okay, I didn't know this was going to be a literature lesson.
Which is Latin for
Little Miss.
English teacher? Yeah. In medias res is Latin for in the middle of things. So it's actually a strategy that a lot of writers use, but we didn't use it for this one. We mean it to be chronological, so we're not fancy with that Latin. But I know in the last episode we said we were going to have this episode out quickly, like quicker than a regular episode, because we were really excited to do the second half. But then our week took a very different turn, and we're sad to report that our sweet, sweet, beautiful dog Frecky, who we've had for well over a decade, she passed away 1 week ago, last Thursday. So we were kind of set to record that night, and she passed away, and we've been pretty devastated. So we're doing okay now. She was sick for a really, really long time. So that's where we're at. Anything you want to say?
I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, I know. Frecky was your best friend. Like, you guys were inseparable. It's brutal.
Yeah. I don't know.
I know. It's even hard to talk about. But we just wanted to mention, like, we did anticipate this episode coming out a week sooner, but obviously unforeseen circumstances. We really thought that she was kind of taking a turn and getting better. Like, we knew she was never going to be great because of her diagnosis and stuff, but we just didn't know it was going to happen like that. So anyways, not to totally be a downer, but we're going to be a downer because we're talking about Kip Kinkel, which is a downer.
This is a pretty sad story.
This is a true crime show, you guys.
You know,
true crime's sad.
It's seldom happy.
We've had a couple okay. Like, no, they're all sad to some extent. So we're going to get started with Kip Kinkel Part 2. So like I said, if you're still listening and you haven't listened to 71 yet, what are you doing? Go back. Again, I want to say that the majority of the information that I'm getting for this episode comes from a Huffington Post article by Jennifer Schulberg. And it was, I believe, published this year. So that's one of the reasons I'm relying so heavily on it. It's probably like 25 to 30 page story. It's very, very, very in-depth. And it was written over a period of 10 months with over 20 hours of interview time via phone, because most of it was during COVID, so she wasn't able to go meet with him in person. And the article is called Kip Kinkel is Ready to Speak. Now, I cover a lot of aspects of the article here, but that article is so in-depth, I highly, highly, highly recommend reading it if you're into this case at all. It also goes into a lot of statistics of like juvenile offenders towards the end and the disproportionate amount of men of color and boys of color that certain laws affect. So we'll get to that, but it's a really amazing article, and you can tell she put her heart and soul into it. So I highly recommend finding that online.
So last episode, we left off with Kip getting in trouble pending expulsion at school for buying a stolen gun and stuffing it into his locker. After being questioned by Detective Al Wartherin, he admitted to buying the gun, but said he didn't know it was stolen. Nonetheless, you can't bring a loaded or unloaded gun to school. After Bill Kinkel, Kip's dad, picked him up from the police station, they returned home. Alone in his room, Kip contemplated suicide, but the voices in his head told him to kill. Kinkel got his Ruger .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle from his bedroom and ammunition from his parents' bedroom. He went into the kitchen and shot his father once in the back of the head, then dragged his body into the bathroom and covered it with a sheet. When Kip's mom arrived home at about 6:30 p.m., he met her in the garage, told her he loved her, then shot her twice in the back of the head, 3 times in the face, and once in the heart. He then dragged her body across the floor and covered it with a sheet.
Ugh. He said he loved her before he did it, too. That's what's...
Dude. Oh. After a noisy night of voices yelling at him, he left for school. He dressed in a long trench coat. He filled his backpack with ammunition and carried 3 guns, a .22 caliber semi-automatic Ruger rifle, his father's 9mm Glock pistol, and a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic pistol. He taped a hunting knife to his leg, and he drove his mother's Ford Explorer to school. He parked 1 block from the high school and walked down a dirt path, taking a shortcut past the tennis court and into the back parking lot. At 7:55 a.m., Kip entered the school. He saw 3 boys walking in front of him. In a recent phone interview with the Huffington Post, Kinkel recalled, quote, "There is quite literally a struggle inside myself because I was being told to." The line falls silent. Then he says, "Shoot these boys." But he didn't. He recognized one of the boys, told him to stay away, then headed toward the cafeteria. On the way, he pulled a rifle out of his coat and shot 16-year-old Ben Walker in the head. He continued walking and shot another boy, Ryan Atterbury, in the side of the face. He entered the cafeteria and emptied what was left of the 50-round clip. As he paused to reach for the Glock, one of the students he had shot knocked him to the ground. Kinkel fired a single shot from the pistol before he was disarmed by several students. He later said he was not targeting any of his victims. They were just the ones who were there. As he lay on the ground, restrained by 5 of his classmates, all he could think about was how much he wanted to die. The voices had told him he could if he just did what they said. "You lied to me again," he thought.
Within minutes of the first shot, Springfield police were at the scene. Kip was in custody by 8:04 a.m. He was like walking into the school at 7:55, and he was in custody, basically in police custody by 8:04. Isn't that crazy? So quick.
It doesn't take very long to shoot 50 rounds.
Yeah. He was taken to the police station to give a recorded confession. There was no lawyer present, but Kip wasn't thinking about his legal rights or his potential punishment. He just wanted to die. When Detective Al Worthen stepped out of the interview room to set up the camera equipment, Kinkel managed to step through his cuffed hands. He grabbed the knife that was taped to his leg, and then when the dude walked back in, he said he charged at the detective, and he said, "Just kill me, just shoot me." So he was basically trying to commit suicide by cop.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
As Kip lunged with the knife, Worthen headed to the door and, with help from another officer, locked Kip inside the room. When they reopened the door, Worthen shot a burst of pepper spray into the room, and Kip dropped the knife onto the table. During the interview, the police were desperately trying to figure out why he had done what he had done. They asked him if he was abused or molested. Kip insisted that he wasn't. "I don't know what's wrong with me. My head just doesn't work right. My parents were good people. I'm just so fucked up in the head, I don't know why. God damn these voices inside my head," he wailed. "I had no other choice." After his confession, detectives went to Kip's house, where they found the bodies of his parents. A recording of Liebestod, the final dramatic aria from Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde, was playing on repeat in the family's sound system. How creepy is that? This like Wagner opera called like Love Death, which I'm loosely translates in German to Love Death. And then on top of that, the reason, like the significance of the song, I mean, you could read into any way you want, but in 1996, that Claire Danes, Leonardo DiCaprio film Romeo and Juliet came out. Did you ever watch that one?
I think I skipped that one.
Really? 1996?
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was grown.
You were 20. Oh, yeah. It was kind of past your time. See, I was
I'm not 13. A weirdo.
I was 13. So I was 12, 13 years old. That was my prime time to watch me some Leonardo DiCaprio. Whew.
Settle down.
Oh. But he's so not my type, but he was so cute in that movie. Oh my God. Anyways, so this was from one of the dramatic scenes from Romeo and Juliet as well. And it was actually the soundtrack, the compact disc, if you will, of the film's soundtrack that was playing in the family sound systems. It was like blasting throughout the house. I don't know if it was blasting, but I imagine it was. I just think it's creepy. And it was on repeat on that song too. Liebestod. Love, death.
Yeah.
Police searched the house and found several explosive devices hidden in the crawl space. Weapons Kip had built at the height of his delusional belief that the Chinese military would soon roll through his town in tanks. When the threat of invasion began to feel less immediate, Kip stashed the explosives in a place he figured his parents wouldn't find it. They also found a bomb in his room made up of soda cans and one made inside of a fire extinguisher. So apparently they had to a bomb squad came in and they detonated the things I guess on the premises, and they evacuated the whole neighborhood and stuff. They made kind of a big production of it because they're like, dude, if this dude is hiding bombs in his crawl space, what the fuck else is in here, you know?
Really?
Yeah. This is the note that was found on the coffee table in the Kinkels' living room after Kip's arrest.
Quote, I have just killed my parents. I don't know what is happening. I love my mom and dad so much. I just got 2 felonies on my record. My parents can't take that. It would destroy them. The embarrassment would be too much for them. They couldn't live with themselves. I'm so sorry. I'm a horrible son. I wish I had been aborted. I destroy everything I touch. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I didn't deserve them. They were wonderful people. It's not their fault or the fault of any person, organization, or television show. My head just doesn't work right. These goddamn voices inside my head. I want to die. I want to be gone. But I have to kill people. I don't know why. I'm so sorry. Why did God do this to me? I've never been happy. I wish I was happy. I wish I made my mother proud. I am nothing. I tried so hard to find happiness. But you know me, I hate everything. I have no other choice. What have I become? I'm so sorry.
What's weird about that, as I was listening to you read it, is that he basically, he has voices. We're going to find out later on that he is a paranoid schizophrenic, right? So obviously he hears some kinds of voices in his head, right? But at the beginning of the suicide note, he basically is saying why he did it. Which is he doesn't want to disappoint his parents. He's such a failure. So it's he gives the very logical reasons why he did what he did, and then he blames it on the voices.
Yeah, totally.
So that's what's kind of conflicting. And obviously I'm sure it came back during trial to bite him in the ass, but he says straight up, it's nobody's fault but my own. I wasn't influenced by these things, and I did this because I suck, and I didn't want to disappoint my parents.
We'll get into it in a second, but he kind of talks about how stressful situations make these voices
worse,
more intense. So I think him getting these felonies and then having to confront his parents about it was making these voices freak out. It was it's all stress induced.
Yeah, totally. But it does, the letter is conflicting though.
No, I mean, he
this
says,
is the reason, but this is also the reason.
And this is my scapegoat.
It's gonna put the nail in the coffin for him for sure. Kip's murderous rampage went viral the next morning. His picture was plastered on the front page of the New York Times. Even President Clinton traveled to Springfield right after to meet with the families of the victims. Between his arrest and his arraignment, Kip spent 18 months in solitary confinement awaiting trial. First in a juvenile detention center, and then, after his 16th birthday, in adult county jail.
That's a long time.
That is a fucking long time. I mean, that is a torture.
You're already
tactic.
have mental problems.
Yeah, and I believe that the reason that they put him in solitary confinement, quote unquote, was for his own good, because it was such a high profile case that if he was in any kind of general population kind of thing, that he probably would have been targeted and either at least beat up or definitely killed.
True.
You know what I mean? So there's no happy medium, I think, unfortunately for Kip. And I don't think there's and many people think that there shouldn't be because he's a monster potentially, you know.
Well,
So
at least he wasn't.
18 months as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old in solitary confinement. That's fucking brutal.
At least he wasn't totally alone.
The lockdown that we just witnessed is about 18 months, right? Which maybe we're going back into again, which we don't have to go there. But 18 months. So from the time the lockdown started back in March, could you imagine if on March 15th, which is about when the lockdown started, right?
Right.
If I had just shut you in the bathroom and not talked to you and threw away the key until now. Could you imagine that?
No.
That's fucking crazy. That's so long. Nobody to talk to. Except for literally the voices in your head. That's fucking
That was
crazy.
my bad joke. I'm sorry.
I know,
I'm a horrible person.
He was left to deal with his overwhelming sense of guilt, loss, and self-loathing, mostly in isolation. Solitary confinement is widely recognized, like I said, as a form of torture, and to Kip, it made the symptoms of his illness all-consuming. This is crazy. This is straight from the Huffington Post article. When one of his teeth started protruding outward, the result of not wearing his retainer in jail, because remember, he just had braces. He's a kid. Kip believed his crooked tooth was being used as an antenna for the chip in his brain. When he found out he was going to have an MRI, he was relieved that everyone could finally see the chip and realize that the government and Disney were to blame. At times, he could no longer tell where his body ended and the walls of the prison began. Less than a year after the Thurston High School massacre, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, do you know who those guys are?
Columbine.
Yep. Killed 13 people at Columbine High School in Colorado before killing themselves. Kip sobbed when he found out, thinking that he may have been the inspiration for their mass shooting. The voices told them that it was his fault and that he should hang himself. He spent that night punching himself in the head, trying to force the voices out. Kip was examined by multiple doctors who concluded his symptoms were consistent with paranoid schizophrenia, although some said a final diagnosis should wait until he was older. Kip underwent endless evaluations, but he wasn't receiving meaningful mental health treatment. He was put on medication but taken off of it for weeks at a time ahead of evaluations with doctors who would later be called on to testify about Kip's mental state.
Kip said, quote, "It's a testament to how people were thinking about mental health. If I had a broken leg or diabetes, they weren't going to not treat my broken leg. They weren't not going to give me insulin. But my lawyers, who are supposed to have my best interests at heart, thought, as a legal strategy, the best thing we can do is to make him as psychotic as possible." Lawyers are great, right? So Kip's arraignment was on May 22nd, 1998. He was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. On June 16th, 1998, Kip was indicted on 58 felony charges, including 4 counts of aggravated murder. A few years before the mass shooting at Thurston High School, Oregon voters passed Measure 11, which essentially tacked on mandatory minimums for certain offenders. It also required kids between 15 to 17 years old who were charged with certain crimes to be tried as adults. Measure 11 took away a judge's ability to consider mitigating factors before sending a minor to adult court, such as past trauma or developmental immaturity. This gave prosecutors tremendous leverage in convincing kids to take plea deals that still carried lengthy sentences. Obviously, Arkansas did not have these laws in place back in 98 for the Jonesboro shooting that we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, and if you forget, it was the 11-year-old and the 13-year-old that killed, I think I misspoke last episode. I think I said 4 people. I think they killed 5 people. So an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, because of the laws that Arkansas had in place for minors, they said basically if you're under 8, I'm obviously not, I don't know the law word for word, but it basically said if you're a juvenile offender under the age of 18, that you serve in some kind of juvenile detention facility until you turn 18. And it wasn't until they put on some like different charges that they actually served until they were 21. But I mean, so we're talking massacre worse than what Kip Kinkel did. And they were out the older one, he was out in 8 years, and the younger one was out in like 10.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's like some
like
Swedish punishment.
If Kip Kinkel had committed this crime in Arkansas when he did, he would have been already out for almost well over a decade at this point, because it's been over 20 years since his crime. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's like that in a lot of other states as well, but I know that they're phasing out and they're really like changing laws that, because we've just never seen, like, I would say, in terms of like mass shootings and stuff, it's just kind of unprecedented right now, like, not like right now, but I'm just saying, like,
you're not wrong.
We've kind of
violent crime is up
gone away with,
everywhere.
Yeah, we've gone away with serial killers, and we've now adopted the mass shooter, because serial killers, forensics is so good now that there is no such thing really as serial killers anymore, because they're
unless you're like Israel Keys or something.
Yeah, they have to be freakishly good. I mean, obviously there are serial killers that pop up here and there, but because of police work and forensics, serial killers don't have a chance to be serial killers. So instead, a lot of theories say that like the people who normally would be serial killers are now mass shooters instead, basically.
After a lot of legal finagling and public pressure to plead guilty and put the tragedy behind them, Kip wasn't in the best position to make an informed decision. Going off his medication for several weeks had caused the voices to return. He had not yet accepted his diagnosis and was terrified of being, quote, retarded, as he put it at the time. Being sent to a mental institution didn't seem much better than prison, and he was desperate to avoid the courtroom. For years, he had tried to manage the voices by limiting his exposure to high-stress situations, avoiding the, quote, bad days. Even the stress of brief appearances in court prompted the voices to gang up on him. He feared a long, drawn-out trial would be unbearable. He took a plea. Next would be his sentencing hearing. Days before his sentencing was expected to begin, Kinkel was found curled up in a ball, struggling to breathe after experiencing a panic attack and hearing voices. He signed the agreement to plead guilty a few days later before he'd had the chance to read most of the document.
Yeah, he just wanted to be done with it. But that's the thing. That's part of the thing with like juveniles and minors and stuff, is that they don't understand the lasting implications of what it is that they're signing, what it is they're doing and stuff, right? He could have tried to fight the case. He could have pled, that he was mentally ill. And like, there actually is a chance he could have gotten out had he really understood the implications of what he was doing. And, whether he should or shouldn't be is, up to every single person listening, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about Kip Kinkel being out and about in the world. I do know that there are people mass shooters in the past who have done worse things that are out and haven't recommitted. And there are people who have been out and have recommitted. So it's hard to say. The famous one from our area is David Adius, who I believe he's probably changed his name by now, but he was the dude who killed a bunch of people in Isla Vista.
Right.
In 2001, the Angel of Death guy. He lives around here. He killed at least a couple of people, 3-4 people. And he lives around Ventura County.
Was he the guy that hit him with the car?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he lived at my old dorms at UCSB, Francisco Torres dorms. And then he had a mental break and took his car and ran down a bunch of people in Isla Vista. His parents were really, 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 really wealthy.
Right.
And they fought hard in court.
Did he have affluenza?
No, it wasn't him. But that was a different guy. But basically, he was mentally ill. I'm not going to say he wasn't.
He was mad that he couldn't get laid. That was the bottom line, right?
No. You're thinking Elliot Rodger.
Okay, I get all these guys.
That's another Isla Vista killer. Yeah. No, and Elliot Rodger and David Adius have a lot in common, but except for David Adius, Elliot Rodger died though, and David Adius lived, and he went through his trial, and he was given, I think, 7 to 10 years in a mental institution, because he actually won his insanity defense, and he's out. And that's the thing. If we truly believe that our system can rehabilitate people like David Adius or Kip Kinkel, then maybe they should be let back out. I mean, to my knowledge, David Adius, who, you know, killed a bunch of people in Isla Vista, which is Goleta, California, over by UCSB. I mean, if it worked for him, I don't know. You know, this is where obviously humans are unpredictable. So you can't say that, like, if we let Kip out, he's never going to kill again, you know? Mental
health seems like such a hard thing to keep track of as far as, like...
Yeah, and also, like, the reason, what we're going to see later on as we continue on, the reason that Kip Kinkel is sort of okay is that he has intense therapy and meds that he takes. The second he potentially, let's say he's let out,
right,
and he can't, and he doesn't upkeep his therapy, or he doesn't upkeep his meds, are you gonna have? Is someone like gonna follow him around, forcing a pill down his throat every 6 hours? Yeah, like, so, like, is it something that he could potentially do? Yes, but is it realistic? I don't think so. Yeah. Well, we'll get there.
So, under Oregon law, a sentencing hearing is like a mini trial in which both sides present evidence to the judge to argue for a more severe or more lenient sentence. The rules of evidence are slightly more relaxed than in an actual trial, however. For example, experts are allowed to express their opinions more freely than in a jury trial. Over the course of the 6-day hearing, which started on November 2nd, 1999, Judge Jack Madison heard testimony from many people: Kip's friends and family, detectives, teachers, doctors, and psychiatrists. He also heard statements from many of the shooting victims and their families. On September 24th, 1999, Kip took a plea agreement and pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. In court, Kip was made out to be a calculating monster by the prosecution. They accused Kip of faking his delusions and voices, downplaying his mental health and the manifestations that come with it. Numerous medical experts testified that he wasn't faking it. Psychiatrist William Sachs said, Kip's crimes were, quote, directly the product of a psychotic process that he had been building intermittently in him over a 3-year period. He predicted that with the medication and consistent psychiatric care,
like we were talking about,
Kinkel could safely return to the community in 25 or 30 years. Quote, so he said, I would be happy to have him as my next door neighbor if those conditions were met. But how do you monitor that?
Exactly. Yeah. Victims and their families testified before the court, most asking for the maximum punishment for Kip's crimes. The only victim's family member that testified on Kip's behalf was, of course, his sister Karen, Kristen. And she's actually, I believe the last I read, she is an educator in the Portland area. I don't know if she works for Portland Public Schools specifically, but yeah, that's who I used to work for. She spoke of his compassion and potential. She stated, only in hindsight do I truly see the signs of someone who is in desperate need of help, different help than any of us knew how to give. Kristen told the judge that she encouraged Kip to go to a quote-unquote safe place in his memory and try to tune out the victim's anger. He stopped her and said, no, I owe it to listen to them. She predicted psychological and medical advancement in the years ahead would help her brother. He will need support, love, medical help, etc. But most of all right now, he needs hope, because she was basically trying to talk the judge into giving him a lesser sentence. After everyone spoke at his sentencing, he addressed the courtroom. So this is Kip speaking.
I have spent days trying to figure out what I want to say. I've crumpled up dozens of pieces of paper and disregarded even more ideas. I've thought about what I could say that might make people feel just a little bit better, but I have come to the realization that it really doesn't matter what I say, because there is nothing I can do to take away from the pain and destruction I have caused. I absolutely loved my parents and had no reason to kill them. I had no reason to dislike, kill, or try to kill anyone at Thurston. I am truly sorry that this has happened. I've gone back in my mind hundreds of times and changed one detail, one small event, so this never would have happened. I wish I could. I take full responsibility for my actions. These events have pulled me down into a state of deterioration and self-loathing that I didn't know existed. I am very sorry for everything I have done and for what I have become. On November 2nd, 1999, Lane County Circuit Judge Jack Madison sentenced Kip to 111 years and 8 months in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Madison said that, quote, there was a price to be paid for each person hit by his bullets. Kip had forfeited his right to a trial and was still condemned to die in prison.
Immediately after the sentencing was handed down, Kip was transferred to McLaren Youth Correctional Facility, a state juvenile prison. He was housed at the Secure Intensive Treatment Program with other young men imprisoned for violent crimes. He attended school and took part in intensive therapy specifically developed for young violent offenders. He remained there until he turned 25, and the length of his stay was determined by the staff's assessment of his participation in the program and the suitability for adult prison. Kip is the first juvenile to serve a life sentence in the state of Oregon. I actually did not know that.
Yeah, me either.
He appealed and was denied. I was trying to find. I kind of was trying to find how many times that he appealed his sentence, and I could only find 3 mentions when I looked for it. Maybe he's appealed more, but the first time he appealed and was denied was in 2002, so just a couple years after his trial. And then there was the biggest kind of advertised appeal was in 2018. The Oregon Supreme Court wrote that it had concluded the facts of the case coupled with the sentencing judge's findings put Kinkel within the narrow class of juveniles who may be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, based on a prior U.S. Supreme Court ruling. Kip's new lawyers appealed his sentence based on the 8th Amendment that barred sentencing a child to even virtual or de facto life without parole based on a treatable mental illness that does not preclude growth, maturity, and rehabilitation. And they denied to hear his case again in 2019. In the correctional facility in prison, Kip has received the mental health treatment he so desperately needed years prior to his crimes. Over the years, the delusions and voices have faded away. He no longer believes there is a government chip implanted in his brain. He accepted his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. He was able to get the proper treatment he needed because he was a high-profile case. They wanted to avoid any negative press about anything involving him in prison, so taking care of him was a priority for them. So one thing that the Huffington Post article said basically was that, hey, we just want to point out that he got supremely amazing mental health treatment, which is not indicative of all of the other prisoners. The only reason like he got what he needed was that they needed him to not get in trouble in prison, basically. They needed him to kind of they needed to kind of shush him.
He's also kind of a case study, right?
Yeah, and that's something we talked about last episode too, is that he has been heavily studied. Yeah,
like a lab rat.
And so like endless psychiatrists, endless psychologists, endless mental health people have like come in, interviewed him, and he's been in countless textbooks as like the boogeyman of school shootings.
So I think that they want
to look good.
Exactly, they want to sell their
product.
Yeah.
In May 2007, Kip received his college degree in global studies. His sister came to his ceremony. He said, I remember her saying that this is so sad. I remember her saying that my parents would have been really proud of me, which is a really powerful thing for me to experience. Oof. To have the feeling, oh, my parents would be proud of me if they were still alive. And then to have the realization, and they're dead because of me? Fuck, dude.
That level of regret is something I hope I never
experienced. Yeah. And this was the kind of... There's a lot of cruel twists with him. Like, obviously, he got the mental health care he needed after he killed everyone. And then...
That seems like that's how it works here in the States.
Yeah, and then another cruel kind of twist of fate is that after he gets his college degree, a couple months later, after his 25th birthday, he was transferred to the adult facility. Right. So like right after like being proud of himself for getting his college degree, he's like basically shut in solitary confinement because again, making that transition from the youth juvenile facility thing, to big boy jail.
Yeah.
a lot of people want to fucking kill him.
He's fresh meat, and he's high profile.
He's fresh meat. He's high profile. So they did end up sticking him in solitary confinement for a while for his own good. And then they basically instructed him, and this is what I got from the Huffington Post article, the guards and like the transition people and the warden and stuff, like talk to him like, hey, you gotta do this when someone does that. They told him like fight back, but like not too hard, you know, like you have to stand your ground or you're gonna get fucking reamed, basically, like literally, you know. And so it was a really, really, really delicate transition. And he did actually get in one fight, and he did fight back, and it ended fairly smoothly. Like the guards let it happen so that he could kind of prove himself.
Right.
And then that's when he went to solitary confinement for a while. And that to this day has been his only offense in prison ever. And it's because like basically the guards told him like, you got to fight at least a little bit to show you're not a pussy, basically. So for years, and then also after he made the transition to big boy jail, he was severely over-medicated, and he says that the staff basically preferred a zombie over a monster. So, yeah, so he said there was like a period of like 3 to 5 years where he was just like Walking Dead, you know, and that it was kind of ironic. There's a lot of irony and little twists of fate here and there, but the prison needed to save money on medications, so they like changed over to a different medication because it was less expensive, and it ended up being more effective for him because he was able to get out of his mental fog.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so because they needed to save money, it actually kind of helped improve his dosage. And also they did start letting more therapists and stuff into the jail, and so he was able to continue his therapy and get his medicine like fixed. And so he's much more like clear-headed now. But he said there was a period of a couple years where he just wasn't even there. He also works in the prison to help new incoming inmates transition to prison life easier. But like there's a delicate balance to make sure that you don't organize too much. Because if you organize too much, you're recognized as a gang, basically, in the prison. And so he has to be really, really, really careful about how he like meets with people. But regardless, he still like tries to make the transition for incoming inmates like easier, which I think is weirdly commendable, you know?
Seems like he's doing what he can to
make amends, I guess.
Yeah.
So the predictions Kinkel's sister Kristen made at his sentencing over 22 years ago have really come true. Kristen said, I was 21 years old, grieving the loss of my entire family, my privacy, and my faith in what kinds of things happen to good people. But for me, this was perfectly clear. My brother was then, and still is, intelligent, capable, and full of potential and the desire to positively impact the world. Kip said to the Huffington Post, I imagine your readers might expect to describe the differences between who he is now and the monster he was portrayed to be in the media. But I can't, because he never was that monster. I think people feel a need to believe he was in order to reconcile what he did. But the sincere truth is that he was then and is now a good and accountable human being who suffers severely from a serious mental illness. The biggest change is external, that we know now what it is and how to treat it, and have been doing so successfully for many years. So that's a weird quote because he's talking about himself in third person. Also, the Huffington Post article has a lot on the SB 1008, that bill, and how it passed in the state of Oregon, and how it could mean another chance for Kip to be free, which gives a glimmer of hope for him, but it pisses off victims and families for sure.
What's
and they
that
hope
law?
that day never comes. It's basically saying that you can't give life sentences to minors, and it's very complicated, and that's one of the reasons that the writer of the Huffington Post article spends like multiple pages on it. So I don't think I could do it justice, and I'm definitely not a lawyer, but I do know that SB 1008 it did pass, and what it does is it opens back up that possibility of him getting out.
Okay.
And I think that part of SB 1008 is an acknowledgement of how fucked up Measure 11 was and how it hurts, like I was saying earlier, how it hurts disproportionately boys and men of color and how they're disproportionately in prison and incarceration in the state of Oregon and all over at way higher rates than people that are white people.
Yeah, I mean, it's an industry.
Yeah. And, you know, and it kind of reminds me of that really, it's dated, but it's an amazing documentary on Netflix called The 13th. If you haven't seen it yet, which I'm assuming most of our listeners have, it's been out for a good like 6 or 7 years. I teach it almost every single year. And every single year, kids are amazed at how fucked up our prison industrial complex is, which, you know, as I keep teaching that film and teaching about the kind of racist and unfair treatment that, you know, our judicial system allows, like every year they're less and less surprised, which is a bummer because kids like know how fucked up the world is. Like you can't surprise them anymore with how much more fucked up it is, I guess.
At least they know what they're living in.
Yeah, I guess. Whew. Anyways, so what do you think?
Mental health it's I don't know. He did that stuff. He, you know, he can't, I don't think he can be in society.
I know.
He needs to be like monitored, make sure he's taking his meds and stuff like that. You know, what's scary, like how many people are paranoid schizophrenic out in public right now.
Yeah. And like I said last episode too, that people with serious mental illness, they're more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime at like alarmingly high rates of victims. So like, we're not saying that people with mental illness are like criminals or anything like that.
No.
But
it's just,
when they are, it's fucking crazy because you really can't control that shit.
Yeah, because they're like chemically like off. So
well, and so they're chemically dependent. So the second that they stop taking it, even on accident, like, oh shoot, I missed it by a few hours. Like, I mean, that's just not a gamble I think that anybody's willing to take with him.
And I think, you know, the lockdowns and stuff and COVID has really made mental health issues skyrocket. Suicides are up, like depression's way up, and like the amount of people taking, you know, antidepressants and stuff like that in the US is like crazy. Big pharma is like.
But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it does mean that people are being treated maybe at too high of rates. Are you thinking? I mean, I'm not trying to malign you.
This is like off topic, but I've heard that there's so many like people like on these antidepressants and like other drugs that like when they piss it out and stuff and it gets into the water supply, it's like, affecting wildlife.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Like
too.
Shrimp are killing themselves, I heard was one thing. Yeah, some crazy shit like that. Yeah.
How do you know if a shrimp kills itself?
I don't know.
Was there like a tiny knife in its stomach?
There's a little note. I don't know, Amy.
Oh.
But I don't know if that's true.
Shrimp killing themselves is very sad.
But they test these waters and they're like, there's like, you know, high levels of methamphetamines and like all these antidepressants and stuff in the water.
Yeah, and there's cocaine in the water and shit too. Yeah,
Yeah.
because people flush their drugs when the cops come. Reminds me of that. It reminds me of, is it Goodfellas?
There's alligators in the sewer.
Well, that has nothing to do with antidepressants.
Well, they're probably high on antidepressants.
So, but do you think, so it sounds like you don't think that Kip should be given a second chance. It's okay.
I don't think he should
he killed 4 people, including his parents.
You know, I'm not sure if solitary confinement is the place for him.
No.
I don't think he's there now, but you know, a mental hospital, if those even exist anymore, I think they just call them prisons now.
Yeah.
I think they closed all the mental health hospitals and they just put them all in prison or just let them on the street.
I mean, there are state hospitals for like basically
criminally insane.
I know I was going to say that, but I think that's an outdated term.
Yeah. I think it's a cool Slayer song, but yeah.
So there it is.
Or if you've gone to any like city in the States in the last couple of years, I'm sure you've seen mentally ill people just wandering the streets because they closed the hospitals and now they're on the streets. Sad state of affairs our country is in, I think.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. I have a heart when it comes to Kip Kinkel, and I feel like we kind of have a slanted view of him because of this Huffington Post article that really humanizes him, because I feel like in the past he's been demonized, and I think that it's only been somewhat recently that he's been humanized, and as a result, I have conflicting feelings about how I feel about him, like meaning like I feel bad for him more, like worse than I do most other criminals, you know, like most criminals, it could just be like, yeah, fuck that piece of shit.
Well,
but
most criminals are like sociopaths that have no empathy.
This guy,
Yeah.
I mean, the second he got caught,
Like, what did I do?
He was fucking crying and trying to kill himself and being like, what did I do exactly?
Yeah.
I hate it. I feel like if someone,
It's a sad story.
It is.
But like,
But
I mean,
but also at the same time, his fucking parents did try to help him for months and months and months before he committed the crimes.
by buying him guns and explosives.
Well, that and also taking him to therapy. He took Prozac for at least 3 months. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I don't think that his parents understood, obviously, the severity of his mental health issues.
He wasn't disclosing.
Bill Kinkel also said to many of his friends that he thought that mental health was bullshit and it was just a way for insurance companies to make more money. He said that to his friends. He didn't believe in mental health.
I guess he found out.
Yeah.
Shit. That's sorry.
No, I know. It's dark as fuck. We're just trying to make sense of it. And there is no sense to make of it because he can't even make sense of it. So, you know, that's not what we're here to do. We're just here to tell you a story that sucks. So there you go.
You're welcome. And thanks for listening this week. You can join our True Crime Dumpster Facebook group. You could follow us on Twitter at TC Dumpster and on Instagram at True Crime Dumpster. You can email us at truecrimedumpster@gmail.com. Listen to our show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, and many other platforms. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and tell your friends about our podcast. Every review, rating, and referral helps us to get a larger audience. Tune in next time as we continue talking out the trash. Goodbye.
Abigail, you want to say something? She woke up right as we were finishing. All right, bye.